There's a bunch of different reasons why people play music, and for me, I wanted music to be my sole thing that I did, my number one income, because I've played music for 40 years. Started out when I was 10 years old. I am now 50, and at the age of 50, I feel like the best opportunities that I could possibly have are right at my doorstep. And I thought this would be something that would have happened 20 years ago, or 25 years ago, or even 30 years ago, when I was younger. And I didn't have a family. So now that, I think technology and the internet and all that stuff's made it possible to connect with people that we would never get a chance to connect with before. So me personally, I'm trying to find a drumming opportunity where I would go on the road with an already established artist. And I've brought up Tesla many times. But there's a lot of those types of bands out there that sometimes the drummer is ill or is taking a break or whatever, and I'm just trying to position myself to be available and on the radar of those people looking for a drummer. So that's my personal thing. And the other thing is now that I'm a full-time musician, this is also my full-time source of making a living, to make money. So having multiple streams of revenue to do that. Obviously teaching is going to be the heaviest one at the moment. Tracking drums for people, that's another one. Playing live, so when I go out and I play with Cliff, the band is getting paid and getting paid decently, and it makes it worth it to go to places like Jackson, for 5 days and play and come home. There's other marketing things that I'm involved with, because I recommend drums and books and equipment and all that kind of stuff all the time, to now where I'm getting a commission off of those. And then the music that I have out there with bands, and Mary and I are involved with trying to write music for film and TV, and so then that's another source of income. So these multiple streams of income. I don't think any musician, unless you are way up there like Adele or somebody, a lot of musicians go on the road and then they have something they do when they come home, and a lot of times they're music related. So that's kind of the lane I'm running and the game I'm in. Going back to this friend of mine, though, it's like finding musicians to put a band together and build something from scratch is it's a process. It can be frustrating for sure, and it's a big task, and getting everybody on board to kind of believe in that project can be very, very difficult, especially as we get older, because we have families and maybe we have careers, outside of music. Maybe we're, I used to be a landscaper. A lot of musicians seem to be in construction of some kind. So we have those commitments, and those commitments take up a lot of our time. So when you're trying to put a band together from scratch, and everybody that's 40 plus years old, they have to follow through with their commitments, and so then carving out time in the evening to put a band together and write songs and record songs, and then the task of booking your band and getting out there and playing, and then everybody claims it's for fun, air quotes fun. Where's the camera? And then hoping to maybe make a little bit of money to afford paying for parking when you're playing downtown. It's there's a lot of sacrifice to be away from your family, financial sacrifice, and just a lot of sacrifice to put something together. So I think as we get older, to build something from scratch becomes less appealing. And so this musician friend of mine, I would say that that's a big factor. There's a lot of work that goes into it, with the only expectation of it's just for fun and to hang out. So if that's the expectation, then the payoff on the other end is probably going to be less desirable, as far as like trying to become some force, a band that's a force to be reckoned with locally, or any of those kind of things. And for Midline, we've had an established thing since 1990. And so what's that, 33 years now? And there was a time when we were really young, and we were just all for one and one for all, going for that. And, we built something over decades. And so for us now, it's putting a show together and hoping to go and occasionally play. And that's really the only motivation, is just to keep making music with our friends, and we're kind of a family, and then put that music out there. So for somebody to build something from scratch, especially like for myself, if I was to put a band together at the age of 50 and finding the musicians that all had that same drive that I do is nearly impossible. And so you just get what you get. I see that Cliff is on here, my buddy Cliff that I play music with. Good morning, my friend. Cliff runs into the same thing. Cliff and I are on the same page as far as like what our goals are musically. And then to have other people in the band that are on that same journey is very, very difficult. And so you kind of see a revolving door of different bass players and fiddle players and all of that. All whom that play with us are great. So whenever we're playing, it's still a really good performance and a really good representation of the band. And so the revolving door is just the way it is. Good morning, Linda, my neighbor. I love my neighbors. Linda just lives a few doors down, and we see her usually in the morning as we're walking the kids to the bus stop. And my son Jude is great friends with her grandson. And so, yeah. Good morning, Linda. But back to, I just made a few notes for my buddy that posted this. If I see him pop up, I'll see if it's okay to mention who he is. But I think his post was really clear on his frustrations in the music community, and just trying to decide which way to go. And so for that person, I would say that, I already mentioned music is a huge commitment and sacrifice. And depending on how successful the band gets or how serious it gets, it can scare or freak people out in the band. Like, oh, wait a second. I don't want to take this chance. I don't want to devote that much time. And so they start putting limits on, because they can't see through the fog, so to speak. There's hard to find a clear vision, I guess is what I'm saying on that. So for musicians individually is like honing in your personal skill, like how great of a drummer are you, or bass player, or guitar player, or singer, and do you recognize the areas that you might need improvement in? I've been playing drums for a very long time, and I've been a teacher for a very long time, and all of that being considered, I'm still learning myself. I want to be a better drummer all the time. I'm always working on being a better drummer, not necessarily from a fundamental standpoint, but because I already understand that. It's like, how can I contribute to this situation the best I can? And so I'm always navigating through those kind of things. And even when people that you played music with for a long time, somebody in the band could turn around and say, don't do that. Okay, fine. Sometimes depending on who we're playing with, we can be short with somebody for a moment. And that's where that friendship makes those situations really smooth to navigate. And you go back in that moment and say, hey, this is a thing that happened at the moment. I apologize, but I really want this. And it's great to play with musicians that can be that honest and that you can be frustrated with at a moment and just work through it. So that's another thing about being in a band, is having patience to work through situations and situations quickly. I get frustrated sometimes with bass players because if they're not locking in with that groove, I can burn a hole in the back of somebody's head with my stare and think, no. And so, maybe I could pull that person aside later and go, hey, such and such song, what are you doing there? What can we do to make that better? Those are the kind of learning things that I'm still working on. Let's see what else. putting a band together is like, what's your age? Age might not be a huge concern as it used to once be. Like, we've kind of been trained in the entertainment industry that if you're not 19 to 28 years old, you'll never have a career in music. Well, again, being 50 years old, I feel like the opportunities for me have been better than they ever have. And I think that's just because of vehicles like this, that it's easier to connect with people. In fact, Nikki Sixx, who I follow on Facebook and Instagram, he had made some posts about Motley Crue doing like that NFL draft show or something. And, there's always a few hundred comments on stuff that Nikki Sixx posted. And somebody commented, I don't remember what they commented, but Nikki Sixx replied to that. And that person was blown away that Nikki Sixx responded. And Nikki Sixx said, well, it's, we appreciate our fans and supporters of the band all these decades. And, I wish I would have had access to my favorite rock stars when I was a kid. And so these forums give us access to those kind of people. And I'm sure some of them not in the correct way. There's always going to be those creepers that are out there, and people want something from people who have some kind of stature as being a celebrity or somebody that's really successful. So I think as fans, we got to honor that situation and not cross certain lines. But it is really cool that if you can there's a handful of drummers that I've idolized or just really respected over the years that I've sent Facebook messages to, and every single one of them have replied to me. And it's just like, what is your intent? A lot of these people can recognize whatever your intent is, and if you have great intentions and are just being honest, usually they'll reply. If you're just a fan freaking out, they're probably not going to respond to you. So I guess that's all age related, right? Again, putting bands together is like, is this a career or is this for fun? Because if it's for a career, your decision-making process is going to be way different than if it's just for fun. Is there money involved? Are you playing music? I believe you can play music and have fun and get paid to do that. And for me, that's necessary. My days of playing for free have become extremely selective. Like, what is the purpose of this? And I mentioned before in some videos, and Cliff has said this too. Like, so often for years and years and years, people will allow your band to play at their club for exposure, and Cliff makes a hunting related or an outdoors related thing. Like, people die from exposure all the time. So if you just play for exposure, you can only do that for so long, and then your band's just going to die. It's like, there has to be some kind of compensation somewhere along the line. Otherwise, you're just gonna run yourself right into the grave of where bands go to die. If that makes any sense. Let's see. And making money too. It's like, people always say, "Oh, I just do this for fun." Well, that's great. It's still a business. Maybe it's a non-profit business, but it's a business nonetheless. And so, regardless if you're doing it for fun or for money or for both, it is a business, and you should treat it as such, because I think you're just going to be happier when you do that. And most musicians, just in general, fail on the business side of things. It's like, again, that's another thing for musicians that freak them out. Is like, oh, I have to be a businessman too? Yeah. Well, I'm Fred Fisher Incorporated, so I got to take care of me, and I have a wife and children that need to be taken care of. And so if I don't treat myself like a business, then I can't follow through with my commitments and my duties as a husband and a father. So we all have to make money from something. It doesn't matter if you're washing dishes at the Chinese restaurant or if you're playing music and on a stage somewhere. You should be compensated. So be careful what you commit to for free. And I think that sends a good message also to venues and promoters. They too should treat their business as a business. and there, I think, boy, I'm going to ramble on here, but a lot of musicians have been taken advantage of, and those venues and booking agents have reaped the rewards of your willingness to be exposed. Let's see. So musicians and money, that's always seems like a taboo or a dangerous topic, but it's a necessary topic. And I learned a lot of this stuff in the last few years from a mentor of mine, Matt Starr, who I've mentioned many, many times. And you can follow Matt Starr on Facebook and Instagram and all that. And the information that he gives, if you start looking through his Facebook page, you can't be friends with him because he's already got a gazillion people that are friends with him and follow him. But you can follow him, and there's a lot of great information that you can get because he does a lot of these Facebook Live types of things, and it's been a life changer for me. So check out Matt Starr, Starr with 2 R's on the end. And Matt has been a great friend. I met Matt in 2019 and became friends with him because we've worked with a lot of the same people, and so we had that connection, and it was easy to reach out to him. And then I've met up with him in person and had some phone call conversations with him, and of course a lot of messaging and emails and such. And he's just helped my career explode, which the result of that is my life is so much better. I've spent years and years and years being miserable, and that heart of the artist, if you're a musician and you're out there playing and it's not your full-time job, it's like, come to the other side, come to the light. But it's a big step to take. There's no bridge. It's like you just got to leap. So to my buddy that's out there that's getting frustrated with putting something together, I don't know if that helps, but it's a lot of things to consider. And I believe you can put a band together and do some cool things and record music. It's just getting people to buy into the same drive, the same goals that you have. That's really important. If you can play with people that are in alignment, it just makes things so much easier. There's always going to be things that happen between people, and can you weather that? And then can you guys weather obstacles that you're going to have to navigate anyway? So for my buddy out there that might see this later, those are my thoughts, because he said his Facebook thing is like, I would be interested to hear your thoughts on those. So hopefully that helps. And then I just wanted to touch really quick, because my main thing that I was going to talk about before I saw my buddy's post was that when I was hanging out with Dr. Matt over the weekend, because you play at night, and so you have all day to hang out. And I got some walking in and some poolside conversation with Matt. And one of those things were, he's had some pretty big life changes over the last 2 years. His wife had passed away, and she had been sick for a really long time. And so that puts your life into different perspective. And, I'm 50, he's 50. I have a lot of friends who are 50 or plus. And Matt said, I've got more life behind me than I have ahead of me. And so he was talking about like what's important and deserving of our time and attention. And so his situation put things into a different light, like how well do we take care of ourselves? Like as we get older, like what kind of shape do I want to be in? If I live to be 100, do I want to live to be 100 and be able to walk around and have a mental capacity and all those things? So how we take care of ourselves was a big thing. And then, being a musician again is just such a huge sacrifice of things. Maybe it's skipping birthday parties. Maybe it's missing anniversaries. Maybe it is, I can't go to the movie with you tonight. I've got a call. I've got to go work, because a musician's life, by and large, is at night. So evening time stuff is going to, and traveling, and a lot of times I go and travel and there isn't room or money to bring the family along. So, and it's a job, there's very few jobs where you take your family with you to work, right? And it's not that much different from a musician's perspective. But the one thing that we talked about, and it's one thing that's been kind of eating at me over the last couple of years, is these devices that we have in our hand are so necessary to everyday business things. Email, video, all of that stuff, music. There's so many great things and advantages to having this thing in our hand. And this is my old one. But when do I stop having this in my hand? When does my kid or my wife or something deserve more attention than what's in my hand right here? And so Matt and I were talking about that. And then the very next morning, as a band, we were sitting in the lobby of the hotel having breakfast. And Cliff was talking to me. And I was talking to Cliff. And I happened to look down and I saw some notification come up on my phone from a student. I grabbed my phone, and as Cliff was talking to me, I immediately stopped giving Cliff my attention, and I looked at my phone and I started responding. And I knew that Cliff was talking to me, but whatever he was saying just disappeared off, and I hit send. And I looked up, and he's looking at me, and I said, "I am so sorry. I heard that you're talking to me, but I have no idea what you just said." And that was like, first of all, it's really rude and disrespectful to the people that you're trying to have a conversation with. And I felt embarrassed, actually. And so I put my phone in my pocket, turned off my notifications and all of that. It's like, why couldn't I give Cliff my full, undivided attention for a half hour while we're having breakfast together? And honestly, I don't remember if what we were saying was of importance or funny or just a situational thing. But this right here interrupted that. And I hate that. I was really embarrassed, and I hated that this got in the way of what was currently happening between me and one of my best friends. And it really resonated, because Matt and I had been talking about the same thing. It's like, when is it okay to be staring at this, and when should we just put it away? And it made me realize so heavily. And then, since I've been home, I've been having conversations with my kids or with Mary or with, we had a few guests in the house for a moment, and we were all sitting on the couch. Every single person, including me, had their phone in their hands, sort of lightly having conversation going back and forth, but our biggest attention was on this. And that drives me crazy. And so, like, Matt's got this rule: no phones at the dinner table. I'm a big fan of that. I've tried to implement that rule, and I've broken that rule myself before. I want to sit at the dinner table and have dinner with my wife and my children without being interrupted by something that can wait. And it just drives me crazy. And when I did that to Cliff, and Cliff was talking to me, I was full on in conversation with Cliff. Phone comes up. I immediately shut that off. The conversation with Cliff. He's still talking to me, but I have this in my hand, and I'm responding to somebody that I could have easily responded to in 30 minutes. And it made me sad, and it made me mad that I did that to Cliff. And so I want to just really try not to have this in my hands for certain things. I don't want to eat with it. I don't want to watch a movie. I joked with Matt. I said, we at the Fisher House watch movies in 3-minute and 14-second segments, because on average it seems like 3 minutes and 14 seconds will go by, because when you press pause, you can see that how long the movie's been on. And we were watching Cocaine Bear the other night. Ridiculous movie. Not really for kids. It's just stupid. It's the stupid show, but we watched it. It was like watching Sharknado. But we had been watching the movie for 3 minutes and 14 seconds before it was stopped to give attention to something else. And then, a few minutes go by, you resume the movie. Again, pause. Now it's like at almost 7 minutes. Like, good grief. I don't want this thing near me when I'm watching movies. I want to say, okay, I can dedicate this hour and a half or 2 hours to watching this movie with my family and not be interrupted. Now, people who text and call, they don't know if they are interrupting you or not. And so, but there's usually very rare that it's an emergency. Like I think we use the word emergency lightly. Like, I can't find my shoes. I have 18 pairs of shoes, but I can't find this one pair. That's not an emergency, So I don't want to have the cell phones at the table. I don't want to have the cell phones while I'm watching a movie. I don't really want to hang out, especially my wife. I love my wife so much, and we are just going 8,000 miles an hour, 24/7. There's just always this thing that we are doing. And I don't know what she's saying. Oh, babe, the lightning storm wasn't there the first night that we watched it. That was while our guests were in town that happened. So, anyway, I want to give my wife attention without having my phone in my hand, I want to have a conversation with her and not be thinking, oh, I got to check Facebook while I'm hanging out with her. I mean, that happens anyway. I am by no means perfect with it. It was just like this conversation I had with Dr. Matt, and then how rude I was to Cliff when he was having a full-on conversation with me, and I just saw that little notification come up on my phone. And of course, you see because you see your screen come on, and I just immediately looked down, and that suddenly took precedence over whatever Cliff was telling me. And it was embarrassing because he's just looking at me like he had to stop his conversation and wait for me to do whatever I was doing. And then he had to repeat everything that he was telling me. And again, it wasn't like whatever he was saying to me had a lot of weight, because I don't remember. But regardless of what he was telling me, he could have been telling me a joke, or he could have been telling me a story, or he could have been telling me information about what was going to happen later that day. I don't remember. But the fact is that I totally cut the conversation off with him and focused on a text message that I could have responded to later. It was not that important. So I have a lot of work to do on myself to be able to stop some of those habits. And I think these things are so, what do I do with it? These things are so beneficial, but they can make you trip too. And I don't want that in the way of my relationships. So anyway, there was a lot to digest there today.